It is Wednesday, November the 8th, and I'm here again with Dr. Bill Warner. We spoke also last Wednesday, and there's a couple of things that have come to our attention I think really deserve to be exposed properly. Sandra Solomon, who you may remember, Dr. Warner,
Yes.
she had brought to my attention an interview by CTV TV. So CTV in Canada is a very large network. It's not as big as CBC. I suspect that it's still connected to government money, though, because everything in Canada is, especially media, and increasingly so, and especially broadcast media. But it's still not quite as full-on Pravda in the communist era as CBC is. But if you look at this particular clip, and I'm trying to decide if I should actually edit it into this or have it up as two separate things, probably both, really. But if you look at this clip, there is so much wrong with it in terms of the way a democracy should work. It is so frightening that I really think this deserves, I mean, everybody in Canada and in the Western world as a cautionary tale should be aware of this. So setting what it's about, a councillor in a Toronto City Council has come up with elaborate explanations through grotesque media misrepresentation of what the event is that took place. And what the event they're discussing is shutting down any objection to government immigration policies on the basis of it being hate speech. So there's a mischaracterization of all the people involved because they're saying because, and now let's deal with the facts first. And we have classical liberals that show up that don't want Motion M103, which is a bill that would actually end the Enlightenment, which would make the criticism of specifically Islamic religious authority illegal in Canada, irrespective of the fact whether that your criticism may be true. And people who are objecting to that, and people who are objecting to unconstrained Islamic immigration, both of which are solid foundational principles of democracy, I might add. Would you agree?
Well, I've seen the video and I read the transcript of it, and the whole business, I'm like you, is horrifying because we get into the thing that he wants to establish a ministry of truth, I guess, which will operate and tell us what we have to say that's hate or not. And I mean, I can always see the ministry of hate now coming forth. But this guy loves government, we can tell that. He's not willing to debate issues. That's not what he's about. What he's about is using, I counted the word might, and I think it was used 5 times, that he wants to bring the might of government. Now, when I think of the might of government, I think of guys coming to my house and hauling me off in cuffs, is what I think of, taking my property and putting me in jail. So when he starts use the might of the government to talk about me, I get a little queasy, Vlad. I mean, I just don't feel good.
Well, you know, he actually mirrored the language of the Liberal government's Motion 103, which refers to a whole of government response. So, and that goes from the military to the teachers, educational system, to the police. Like, in this, Canada's effectively a communist country.
Well, I know, but his speech eliminates one potential place that they can get a lot of more hate speechers put in jail, and that is the school system will have to start training the children, just as they did in the Soviet days, to report anything back to the authorities that their parents said around the kitchen table.
I can tell you already that that's happening, and it started even.
Oh, don't tell me that.
Oh no, it really has. I mean, 15 years ago, even I know families that were telling me that their kids were supposed to go home and find any appliances that weren't efficient enough and report back so that the family could be bullied into buying more energy efficient. I mean, this has been going on for some time, so that's not new. And in terms of, if you were to go to school and suggest that the science says that there's no such thing as a sex change, it's just an extreme makeover, and that in fact the Johns Hopkins Medical Research Center has specifically said they won't do that surgery anymore because it offers no symptomatic relief to people that complain that they feel that they should be they should have the at least outer appearance of the opposite sex. It virtually helps no one, and if you point that out, you're guilty of a crime. I think in Canada,
another hate crime. I bet.
According to Canada's Bill C-16, I believe it is a criminal offense to refuse to use whatever pronoun a person decides that they should be addressed by or referred to by, at that particular moment, which is subject to change without notice as the person fantasizes. So, but just to bring it right back to this particular thing, which is so terrifying, this first CTV mischaracterized the event. What really took place here is that classical liberals, who they call far right, which of course is an attempt to link them to Nazis who are far left, just for the record. So these classical liberals show up and say, we object to M103, which prevents us from criticizing religious authority, and specifically Islamic religious authority, which is a fundamental pillar of any free and democratic society, certainly a liberal one, small L liberal one. And then it's because Antifa shows up, who they characterize as anti-racist, which is ludicrous, of course, because Antifa is a massively racist organization. It is an anti-white, very specifically, but anti-free market and anti-liberal organization, which openly carries communist flags and wants to see a transformation of our society into something which we've seen before in history.
But let me guess. Antifa is not a hate group.
Well, no, they're characterized in this report as as an anti-racist group, which is just ludicrous. It's ludicrous to call them that. And in all instances, Antifa instigates the violence. So in this clip, they're saying that because there is violence at these things, they're going to blame the people who object to the government policy of mass Muslim immigration and feel they're entitled to rational freedom of speech as the instigators of this violence, although it's untrue at every level. And so they're going to pass laws saying that they may not hold demonstrations on any government property. And that includes parks, stadiums, or public streets.
Well, let me ask you something, Vlad. If they do that, where would you hold a demonstration if it can't be on any public property? Where would you hold it?
Well, this is Canada. And as we just saw in the UK, where Tommy Robinson tried to hold a book launch in an entertainment venue, and the venue was told 24 hours or less before his book launch could happen, they were told, if you go, at first they said, if there's any violence, we're going to pull your license as a venue, as an entertainment venue, which means that there's no such thing as private anymore, is there? Right? Once you can say to a restaurant that you're a public place and so you're not allowed to have smoking in there anymore, well, then it's not a private. The only aspect in which it's private is the owner has all the responsibility but none of the rights of a private place. Isn't that right?
I bet it's private property when he goes to pay taxes.
Well, that's exactly right. That's in a communist system. You don't really get to discuss that much. Right. So we have this guy saying public streets. There'll be no public property. Of course, as I think it's reasonable to say that any private place you were to hold a venue, Antifa would show up and see to it, just the way they did in Montreal, when Act for Canada tried to bring in Paul Weston to speak at Ruby Foo's Hotel.
A good man.
Yes, he is. He's he's a great example of a classical liberal and a great thinker. And he came to give a speech, and Antifa showed up and, in a very thuggish manner, made sure that Ruby Foo's was punished for even allowing the possibility of somebody speaking against the increased Islamification of Canada and unbridled Islamic immigration. So, of course, no public property means no private property either.
Let me ask you a question. Since they're so against hate, what will I do with my thoughts like, I hate child marriage, I hate polygamy, I hate wife beating, I hate female genital mutilation? Is that hate speech? Who gets to determine what hate speech is and isn't? Well,
actually, here's the weird thing. I think there actually is a formula for that. They basically divide all the things that you would say into two categories. One would be they would say that you should hate those things and they hate them with you. And two is those things don't apply to Islam and therefore it doesn't matter, right? Because there's an official view.
Speaking of Islam,
go ahead.
This man speaks as though he's a Sharia scholar. I mean, everything he brings about is as though the Islam is already controlling the state.
The Toronto City Councillor?
Yes. Oh, and everything he suggests is pure Sharia.
And definitely the language I heard him use was most decidedly the language the federal government uses as a way of condemning and demonizing anybody that holds classically liberal values of freedom of speech. And that, like, for instance, I got to go back to Geert Wilders here for a second. Geert Wilders was
a truly great man.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely.
Would he be allowed into Canada?
He was once. I know that a group that I used to work with did bring him in to speak at the National Arts Center, and it went very well. We had to have extraordinary security measures. We had to not announce the name of the place until the last minute. But it went off without a hitch, and he was great. I could send you that footage if you like. He's really good. But would he be allowed back into Canada now? Hard to say. I kind of doubt it.
I just wonder, since I'm on official hate lists in America, would I ever be able to come to Canada if this sort of material goes down?
I think we should find out very soon. I think we're going to have to test that very soon, is what I think. But geared, as I understand it, the purpose of government is you have a party which is elected, and they're in power, at least in a parliamentary democracy, right? I think it's somewhat the same in the States, but it's structured differently. And you have the party which didn't get elected in, and their job is to form what we call the Queen's opposition, or the official opposition. And the opposition's job is to object. So in Canada, traditionally, it's knee-jerk reflexive oppositionism. In other words, even if the opposition agrees with the government policy, their job is to object to it and to explain why it's bad. And at the end of the day, one hopes that they whittle down the thing until it becomes better than it was initially because of debate and what other machinations you see behind the scenes. It's a very messy system, somewhat entertaining, and it's the best one we've got, except for everything else, as Churchill said, right? Or the other way around.
Exactly.
So, in any case, Geert Wilders was suggesting that the current immigration policy in the Netherlands of unbridled, unlimited, unrestricted Islamic immigration, and then the appeasement of those Muslims and the changing of Dutch law and Dutch culture to accommodate Islamic thought and Islamic behavior wasn't a good idea, and that it should be reversed.
Exactly.
Now, that is the job of an opposition MP. And when the Dutch government arrested, tried, and worse, convicted him, the message went out that no opposition to these neo-Marxist policies can exist anymore. That every country that thinks it's a democracy, it's pure tokenism. Because if it becomes illegal to oppose these policies under the totem, the beard of hate speech and these selectively enforced rules of thought and conduct and speech, then how? And what I'm seeing here in Canada is precisely the same. There is clearly a playbook at work.
Well, the playbook is to eliminate all dissension. And yet, here's the thing. What just separates our society from Islamic society are two principles. One is the principle of the unitary ethic, where all people are treated as equal. And the other is critical thought. What this legislator or counselor is saying is, we don't want critical thought. And yet it's through critical thought that we achieve building up of new, stronger ideas. The friction of, look, what he wants to do is to say there can be no friction of debate. The state will not tolerate any debate on its social policies. Well, once you've got that, I mean, you've got full-blown Marxist control of everything, or fascist control. I'm getting a little confused about all the oppressors' different guises of names. But anyway, they don't want people like me to talk. And maybe I'm just calling me selfish, but I would like to be able to continue to express my ideas. So when I hear somebody like this going, I know this is a man who I would want not ever to have authority over me, because he and I don't agree on the basics. For instance, I'm not so sure that diversity is a strength. I think unity is where strength lies, and yet the now phrase, and it's in America too, diversity is our strength. I've never understood that.
Well,
unity is where the strength is.
You know, I'll tell you something funny about that. The leader of the contemporary British Labour Party, he frequently goes into the public and speaks about the importance of diversity. Diversity is our strength, and he echoes things that you hear from our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, that we are strong not despite our diversity, but because of it. These are, of course, intended to cause cognitive dissonance and intended to cause disunity. And then in front of Muslim crowds, he talks about the importance of solidarity and of standing together. And he's very, very clear. And I've actually edited together two clips back to back of Jeremy Corbyn, that's his name, Jeremy Corbyn, speaking to the public about how important it is to be diverse, and speaking to Muslim about how important it is to have solidarity and unity and to stand together, because that's how you win. So obviously,
he understands that unity is strength.
They all do. Everybody does. If anybody is advocating diversity, it is in order to destroy any strength.
That's what I find.
That's what I find too. In any case, this particular.
Let me ask you this:
Sure.
how being an American asking a Canadian here, how close do you think that they'll be to in wherever the city this man is from? Toronto, was that it?
Yes.
How close do you think they are to being able to pass such bills?
Well, see, this is where it gets interesting because does the municipality have the kind of power to deny access to certain opinions and groups over all municipal territory, or wouldn't that be a federal thing? I mean, if M103 becomes a law, and as M103 says, a whole of government response would be needed to Islamophobia. If M103 becomes a law, then it will become a federal thing, and they would be able to do this. I really don't know whether or not municipalities in Canada can do this. I mean, I suppose the answer is it depends on whether or not the police go along with it, right? Because in Canada, we're disarmed.
I tell you, I find that the police in America do whatever their masters tell them to do.
Then we're in trouble.
I mean, that's just what I find the police are. I've learned to treat the police no longer as patriots, but simply as bureaucrats with guns and the power of arrest.
Well, I think that's increasingly true across the Western world, not counting Central and Eastern Europe. Because, you know, it's interesting when I listen to the Czech leader. I'm not sure if it's the president or prime minister, but the Czech leader's actually making some stronger Second Amendment noises than I hear in the United States. I mean,
That's amusing.
No, it's absolutely true. He's telling people that they should go out and get guns, and they should carry them.
The last time I was in Czech, one of the men got up early to leave a meeting. He was going off to the gun range to try his new 45 caliber Glock.
Yes, they feel very strongly that an armed public is the way to preserve freedom and protect themselves from jihad. And the Czech leader has specifically said that, you know, the public needs to be armed so that if you see an act of jihad about to go down, you can stop it. And I think that's fantastic. In fact, my only complaint about the Bill of Rights, the United States Bill of Rights, is they got the first two amendments in the wrong order. There simply is no freedom of speech.
Now, wait a minute. Freedom of speech is in the First Amendment, and nobody's more for freedom of speech than I am. I'm for outrageous freedom of speech. I reject the concept. How about this? Send this to your Canadian counselor or whatever he's called. I reject the concept of hate speech. I don't have any objection to hate speech. Lord knows I'm certainly hated and told about it by enough people.
Well, of course. I mean, hate speech is a ludicrous term, which it's a pernicious little trick to try to selectively enforce what ideas are acceptable and what aren't. What neither of us have mentioned about this video of the Toronto councillor is, and both of us know, is the question when he's talking about banning hate speech from any municipal territory. What the real problem is who gets to decide what's hate speech, and we know it's going to be him, and we know based on the coverage which ideas are. And the classically liberal ideas, the ideas of freedom of speech, is hate speech. And we know that he's going to be selecting against things which are true and dismissing it as opposing hate speech. And we know that this guy's going to go. So you're absolutely right. Hate speech laws are ludicrous, and they should be rejected. And the only reason I think that the first two amendments are out of order is because there is no freedom of speech without arms. Because the second you disarm the people, someone's going to come along and decide what you can say and can't say. And any platitudes about freedom of speech become just that.
Any tyrant's first step when he seizes control of a central government is to eliminate the arms.
Yes, and that's been done in Canada that was done in Canada quite a long time ago. And the only place I see that turning around, I mean, they did it in England. I think it was in the 50s. The British public were very highly armed. It might have been earlier than that, and the British had just no problems with crime. And the police had no guns, but the public did. And the police would borrow guns from the public if they needed it. And it actually worked out very, very well. That's the way a free society looks. And how a not free society looks is the UK right now, where Tommy Robinson was doing a book launch, and the government threatened the venue in two different levels and forced him to, at the last minute, he found some sort of amphitheater, some open-air theater, which he managed to get to so quickly, and thanks to the internet, tell all of his followers to get there to the book launch. He was able to do the book launch before the police could shut that down, and he gave a free copy of his book, Mohammed's Quran, to anybody who actually showed up. I think he ended up with 2,000 people at this thing, and it apparently went exceptionally well. But that's guerrilla-style freedom of speech, where you're trying to stay one step ahead of your own government to be able to say something which is demonstrably true.
By the way, what he did there is a form of resistance. And what will have to happen, because I predict that bills such as this, anti-hate speech, anti-hate demonstrations will come about. And the only thing to do then is to have mass civil disobedience. And it's very difficult to get a bunch of people together, 100 or so, who are willing to say, yes, I'll go downtown with the cops. But once you have massive civil disobedience, this was done in civil rights in America. The motto was, they can't arrest us all, and that is indeed true. You have enough people doing something. Let's fantasize 1,000 people show up as an anti-hate speech demonstration. The police nor the courts cannot process the arrest of 1,000 people. I mean, the system just breaks down. And once you can't arrest all of them, you can't arrest any of them.
I'm not sure about that because, what I see happening is in the UK is what they're doing is selectively enforcing everything such that the system is being allowed to break down, even encouraged to break down when it comes to traditional, classical, indigenous Europeans in the UK, like actual British people. But they're not prosecuting Muslims who are committing sometimes serious crimes. Not. So, I mean, it seems like what they're doing is fine-tuning the system to be extremely racist.
And of course, what this does is it merely builds up more and more pressure at a deeper and deeper level till finally one day when you lance the boil, it's ugly.
Yes, because the longer you go without solving a problem, the more severe the solution has to be. That is a historical constant.
Well, do these people study history anymore? I'm not sure. In the United States, they're beginning to try not to teach history at all because it has too many valuable things to teach against tyrants.
Yes, I think it was Mark Twain that said, if history teaches us anything, it's that people don't study history.
He also said it doesn't always repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
It does rhyme. That's my very favorite quote. Bill Warner, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy Wednesday to do this. I really think things are getting serious in a way that
seriouser and seriouser.
Yes, just couldn't have imagined. It's so sad and it's so frightening. And when you walk around the streets and try to discuss this with the average Canadian, they have no clue what's going on. It's just they're going to be so blindsided when they realize that things they took for granted as being constants are just gone.
It's true. Thanks a lot, Vlad.
Sentries, halt! Sentries, take post! To stand as part of our united local community. Thank you for this wonderful demonstration of our community, our unity in the face of adversity that our friends face. Tonight, Mohammed, the friends have all arrived. It shows how strong and how popular you are. Thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. Unity is our strength. Thank you so much.
We are a lovely multicultural city in Birmingham, and we want to keep it that way. So I say to people in Padiga, look at the world you live in, look at the strength of diversity, look at the ability for us to learn from each other, and you'll be much happier people if you'd go down that road. Or do you want to build a world where people do actually have the diversity they crave, the ability to follow the faith they wish to, and the necessity of respecting each other's faith? It makes for a much better, calmer, more peaceful world. This mosque is playing a huge role in bringing that about. And we are an inclusive community that respects all and respects all faiths.
Good book says, don't throw stones in glass houses.